Hey everyone, we're back again for part 2 of the FK arm setup. Last time what we did was we set up a little FK arm for one side of our character's arm. But the one thing that we didn't cover or not cover in detail was the idea of matching axes. So you can see over here when I select this joint and even this joint, we can see which way the axes are pointing if you were to look at how these, what color, like how the gizmo is essentially oriented. If you want to see this a little bit better, you can also go into component mode and click that little question mark. And that too is going to show you which direction everything is pointing in. And if you look in the lower corner of my window, you'll notice my world gizmo is aligning with this as well. This is one of the main reasons why we had no problems doing direct connections with the controllers and with the joints, because the joints were actually aligned with the world. But what happens on the flip side, where the joints don't align with the world? Well, let's pop in and get started on making sure that we actually do continue to have things aligning, because nobody wants to deal with that miserable stuff of having to figure out which way to go on selections or connections. So I'm going to grab first my outliner, and I'm going to just go into my skeleton menu. I have my, as you can see, joint chain selected. And I'm just going to come into here and I'm going to mirror the joints. So by default, if you check your settings, these are what your mirror joint options tend to be. So I'm going to change this because I know that the plane I'm using, the mirroring across plane, is the Y and the Z, because I sort of want this flat plane to be the area along which it mirrors. The nice thing is it's going to mirror across the 0, so I don't have to worry about anything other than making sure that it's mirroring across a particular plane. I'm also going to use the behavior function. I can also show you the orientation function. Personally, I like behavior, but that's because I work from a place of animation where if I can select two controllers and set keys on them really at the same time, that's great. So, yeah. And then for naming, because I want to be as lazy as possible, I just go in and I say search for L underscore and replace it with R underscore. This is just to make it easier for me to go in, and I won't have to go and replace all of these L's for lefts with R's. I hit apply, and you can see it's actually spaced evenly across on the other side. So here's the advantage that we were talking about using the behavior option, where if I were to select this and I were to do this, you can see I get a nice little look at me, I'm waving my arms kind of animation option, which is exactly what we want, because we don't want to have to put in the work, most animators do consider it to be more intuitive to be able to go ahead and select and move their characters in such a way. So here I've got this, but now we have to mirror or duplicate this. So I know that this is something that everyone thinks we should just be able to do by just doing a quick mirror function, but there's a couple of steps to it. There's a few different ways to make this work as well, and I'm not going to say that this is the only one. It's just, for me, this is the easiest way to do it. So follow along and let's see how it goes. I'm going to first select my left shoulder control, and I'm going to group it to itself. And if you see, by default grouping, the pivot of this set of controllers gets centered out, which is wonderful, because that means when I duplicate this group, that's Control D, I end up having, of course, a second set of controllers, exactly like the first, that are also in a group. I can then take this group, because groups are invisible, and I'm going to just mirror this across by changing the scale to -1. And I did it on the x-axis only, because obviously y and z won't make any difference here. But I basically scaled it and inverted it, and there we go. So here now we have this group, which is essentially your left arm, Control FK group. Jeez, it's getting longer. And this is our right arm control FK group. And because I'm lazy and I love to be lazy, I'm going to come over here, go into into my menu and modify, search and replace names. And I'm going to put in the exact same settings. The search for the L underscore, replace it with R underscore in the hierarchy. You can also do just selected, but that means you would have to select all three of these. So if you do just hierarchy, it's going to keep track of what you've got selected and hit replace. So now I have the two sets of controllers, and let's take a look at the axes just to make sure that we actually have made the good, like an appropriate move on this, because otherwise this is gonna, be pretty awful pretty quickly. So let's take a look at this. I'm gonna go into my component mode. You can see over here, the X is still pointing along that way, but Y points downward and Z points backward. If we select these guys, whoops, we got a problem. So that's because even though I mirrored it, I didn't mirror it on the Y and the Z. And you can see over here, when we go into component mode, Y is downward, Z is backward. Which, again, if we were to look over here, Y is up and Z is forward. So that just means we're coming over here to this group, turning all of this to -1. The advantage, now we should have matching axes. So in case you haven't figured out what I was doing or why I was doing this, the point of this, or the takeaway that you should get from here, is if you ever need to change the orientation of a controller, it is not a good idea to move it to a place and then just zero it out and then try to eyeball the control, the orientation or the axis to match. The thing to do is to work with groups, because groups are invisible and non-selectable in your actual workspace, so animators can't accidentally get to them. And in case you're wondering, eyeballing is never a good thing. You can eyeball some things you can get away with, but when you're working with controllers and the joints that they control, never do that. Never, ever, ever. And that's just a really important thing. So now let me just open up my node editor, and let's just go ahead and do a quick set of controls, like connections, and make sure that we are able to, I'm going to just do that we are actually able to make the connections and have these arms work the way we want them to. So you notice I'm actually just pulling out our transform options, our transform nodes. Here, I'm going to put the wrist on this side. Oh, sorry, come here. Oh, there we go. So these are 3 transforms for our controllers. We don't need, obviously, their shape nodes. Remember, these are multiple shape nodes. I also need the 3 joints that are going to be controlled by our controllers. So I'm going to just go ahead, add them here. And similarly, let's just make sure that they're sort of sitting near and through each other so that we can just connect them more easily. So here I've got nothing selected. I hit 3, everything opens up. There's some overlapping, but we can fix that as we go. So for example, now we've got the R shoulder joint FK and the controller FK. I'm going to just drag it and make these 2 things go just like this. I'll hit 2, they'll collapse and connect like this, which then of course makes it easy for me to attach the elbow controls and joints. And again, select these 2, hit 2, and there you got that, until finally we get to the wrist with our quick rotation connection, and again, hit 2, and you are in business. So now, let's test these things out. You can see one other thing, which is this right shoulder, elbow, and wrist, they are parented in the exact same way that the left elbow and wrist controllers are parented. That means, and let's come out of component mode for this, when I move this, ooh, that's awkward. Ooh, look at that. And flip. Okay, kind of seems to work. So let's just go ahead over here. We've obviously got some issues and errors going. For starters, I probably should not have mirrored this. Or this. This is the only one that works. So let's quickly go in. Once again, bringing back our node editor. Isn't it wonderful that we don't have to do this too often? Let's come back here. Let me change this back. I was wondering why it only had to be -1. There's that, and -1. Just making sure it mirrors across. And once again, bringing these 3 back, you can see the rotation axes are connected, or will be connected again, because they're all open to the same thing. So there we go. Now let's do a quick test. Okay, that moves with it, which is a good thing. Also there, also like this. Great. Same thing here. Double check. Always double check. You are going to find, even though things seem really like logical to you, they may not always work, but that's just the way it goes. So then here's this. This is what I meant about the intuitive work. I can select both of these and I can make my character do this. Offsets and stuff you can always put in later, but at least now you have both of your FK arms. So maybe it's not always about perfectly matching the axes. Maybe it's just about recognizing and understanding that an inverse is just an inverse. So there you go. Part 2 of FK arms.